My name is Lucille Webster. I'm the director of Durban University of Technology, and in my other life I'm also a board member of SANWIC. And our first speaker is Ms. Eve Gray, who will be talking about decolonizing the university in South Africa, the role of research publications. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Eve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know it's the graveyard shifts. I make you a promise. I'm going to tell you the story, and if you catch one single number in my presentation, I'll buy you a drink tonight. So this is quite a lively story. I hope you will enjoy it, consider it. It's very important stuff. And at the end, please tell me if I should at UCT be turning the students onto the publishing system. So let's see. Research publication does play a role in colonizing our universities. And as you know, for those of you who are not from South Africa, we've had trouble in our university since 2015, when the statue of Rhodes was taken down as a result of fierce student protest. Probably rightly. In the US, they've just taken down statues which were put up after the historical moment in order to provoke race hatred. Those are going down. There was complete turmoil, and the hashtags came thick and fast. Rhodes must fall, fees must fall, and the one that encompasses them all that I will talk about, which is decolonize the university. And you may ask, what is colonial about journal publishing? And this afternoon I'm going to tell you quite forcibly. Ironically, our Minister of Higher Education, who's not often very active, picked up on the problem a long time ago. In 2009 at UNESCO, he said, over the last few decades, some things have not changed. Sorry, let me just get the timer going. I'm not working it. Can you just get it out there? Thanks very much. Sorry. So some things have not changed. There's no significant break in relations of knowledge production between the colonial and the post-colonial eras. And what he says that's important, African universities are essentially consumers of knowledge produced in developed countries. And I think if you think about that, you'll realize it's true. The publishing system forces us to turn our gaze northwards. Whereas if you sit in Cape Town, where I live, I don't know if anybody can tell me where the nearest landfall is to Cape Town. If you get in a boat and you sail out to sea, where's the nearest continental landfall to Cape Town? Cape Bahia, Brazil. It's not London, it's not New York, I promise you. And here in KwaZulu-Natal, the trading partner is Kerala, in the south of India. So our tradition is that, but we constantly look north. It was only in 2015, with the student riots, that the question of knowledge production and publication began to become a mainstream issue. And one wonders why it took so long. The students at UCT, and I think in other universities, you may not realize, those of you who weren't involved in these protests, spent days and weeks talking and talking and talking and listening and engaging with leading academics across the country about the issues they wanted to know about. They followed people like Steve Biko and Frans Fanon and Ngugi, and from that you'll learn that the two key characteristics of colonization are the imposition of language and the imposition of national identity. And Ngugi said that's the most disabling thing you can do to a country, is remove its language and remove its identity. So what happens with journals? I love this. I picked up in one of the discussions, reported afterwards. The students turned to the people, the professors they were talking to, and said, how do you become a professor after you've got your doctorate? And the answer was, you publish journal articles. Pause. Lots of journal articles. Longer pause, in international journals. And I kid you not, that was the answer. That is how you become a professor in South Africa. It's an indication of the frenzy with which we chase journal impact factors and journal articles. And the question is, of course, why I'm saying this is part of the decolonisation agenda. You might have picked it up from the International, but it's more than that. Why is it so? The Budapest Open Access Initiative put out very clearly when it started the open access movement formally, that open access was a matter of access to journal articles. And it linked the journal articles to the old tradition from 1650-65 of the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society. So basically the message put out about open access, it's like that classic stuff from the 17th century that's always been around. And I would argue that transactions actually was much more like networked open science. It was people talking to one another. If you've read it, it's much more like a blog with important articles, trivial articles, all kind of stuff mixed up together. And what you may not know, because not many people seem to know this, is that our current journal system dates from post-World War II. It was a product of that period in which science and knowledge had enormous force and weight, including the atomic bomb. But before the war, it was a matter of telecommunications, communications, radio, radar, and of course in the war, military technology and ultimately the atomic bomb. So information was very, very important, and this had been recognized before. Vannevar Bush was a prime promoter of this issue. So there's radar that we had. And you might have heard of Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was a newspaper man best known, a real character, rowdy, very difficult, but a very skilled and talented businessman or strategic operator. And I don't know if you knew that he's one of the key people behind the growth of the commercial journal sector. And what happened, he worked his way across Europe. He came from a very poor family in Czechoslovakia, and he joined the army, and he had to frequently change his name because he couldn't use a Czechoslovak name. And he was Robert Maxwell by the time he arrived in the British sector of Germany after the war in the occupied zone, and he worked for the British Information Services. Well, I know from the British Information Services when I was in Luxembourg and Britain was joining the common market that they're very politically minded. And it's very, very important that English be the mode, not American English and not any other language. So clearly, as soon as I saw that, I knew that there was going to be that pressure. What had happened was that Germany used to be the leader in scholarly communications and publishing, but had been battered during the war, and Springer's content was scattered all over the place, as were other German publishers. So there was this content, and it mattered, and it was valuable. And Maxwell offered UK distribution to Springer. Of course, he had some influential friends and could do it. And he picked up the content, and he took it to Britain, and he started setting up a journal system there. Eventually landed up in Headington Hall in Oxford, which is a very grand, stately home. I don't know if any of you have visited Pergamon Press when it was there. It was great. You know, obviously he was looking for another style for himself. 2 years later, he had a staff of 120. What he did was look at the journal system as it was, analyze it, take it apart, and look at what needed to be done. Authors needed to be empowered. Editors needed some powers pulled back and others pushed further. But most of all, the journals had to be recognized from a sloppy and indifferent kind of environment in the scholarly societies. So he set about professionalizing, setting up marketing, setting up promotion, and building an effective journal system. In what I didn't know until quite recently was at the same time the British government quietly set up a national initiative to purchase German content and give it to Butterworth as a British effort. Now you tell me this is not colonial. This is a colonial system. It's a government and a language harnessing knowledge from another country and starting to build a big enterprise that is built on language and nationalism. It might be 1955 about, but it is a colonial system. Remember, most African countries were still colonies then anyhow. So English would become the dominant language of science. It didn't happen by accident. It was part of this deliberate push for the North Atlantic partners, the victors in the Second World War. So there we have the essentials of the neo-colonial empire. And it grew and grew and grew. By the time Robert Maxwell died, he fell off his boat, was found floating naked in the water. Nobody to this day knows what happened to him. It was rumored that he was a treble agent for Russia and Israel, among others. So nobody quite knew what, but at that stage he was in newspapers, in popular newspapers. So this system grew, and then in 1955, along with this, Eugene Garfield set up the system for indexing journals. And this was for librarians to be able to choose their journals and measure the impact of their journals. The extension of the system to create impact factors for authors was a second step, and that was the fatal one. Because once you've got authors built into the fact that publishing in these journals, which I've already said were colonial, was going to get you promotion in your job, it was a completely inelastic market. The librarians had to buy the journals for the authors. The university had to let the librarians buy the journals because of the impact factors and the prestige. And then you link world rankings and stuff like that into it. And you're trapped in the system, and we still haven't got out of it. Quality is perhaps not the right word to apply always. Impact factor applied to authors is in fact statistically illiterate. But somehow we go along with it. You saw this morning why. Promotion and prestige became inextricably linked to journal publication of a particular kind. It's a competitive kind, and competitiveness promotes the dominant profile in the society, with white men, I hate to tell you, at the top. So it's no accident that there are a lot of white male professors compared to the rest of the demographics. Those were all the professors and the gowns waiting for a more diverse audience. Africa's on the margins of this world. The international standards that applied did not apply to Africa. International meant relevant to Britain and the US. So if you publish in one of these international journals, you have to gear your writing to conform to what they regard as important. And the Lancet, for example, said they could not publish African medical research because it was not of interest to British and American readers. Yochai Benkler said Alzheimer's and pet dogs was more popular than malaria as a publishing subject. So it was quite a distortion, and you get this push for our research to be pushed out into what were essentially, in many cases, the wrong places. This was to the detriment of developing countries, and the results could be disastrous. We saw this recently. Can you tell me that in any of the northern countries in the world, an epidemic with as fearsome consequences as Ebola had could have been discovered in 1974, and no serious research had been published on it ever since? Interestingly, when this happened, immediately, being where we are in the current place, the researchers went into collaborative mode. And they very quickly started coming up with answers and possible remedies and possible vaccines. And having neglected malaria research for decades, we are incidentally close to getting a vaccine for malaria now for similar reasons. But this was the tragedy. This kind of research just didn't happen. The African countries didn't have the capacity for it, and it didn't count as international. So open access comes along, and I'm going to stick my neck out now and possibly earn the fury of some of my colleagues. Because if you read it, an old tradition and a new technology have converged to make a public good, the old tradition, willingness of scientists, etc., and research and scholarly journals is what it's aimed at. And I think that journal focus was a mistake. But here we have Baird and Zimanda saying our research should focus on the development and social needs of our communities. In other words, research must address our development problems. And a bit later in the Carnegie Poverty Initiative, this came up. This is Rick Desagi writing an article on that. And Trevor Manuel, our Minister of Finance, said the same thing. He said, we're doing a lot of research and we're throwing it away. And I think this is where Africa has something to teach the rest of the world. We do very good development-focused research. There are nearly, I think, 160 research units at UCT, most of them which produce very high-quality research, which is focused on development needs. And if they publish, it's on their own website, on their own, because nobody pays any attention to it. Here we have class at the University of the Western Cape. Land reclamation is a massive issue right now. In a project we were in, we set class up with a publishing system with their own communications officer and a website that now works brilliantly and a small repository they put their stuff on, and they get a lot of exposure. But there are hundreds of these research organizations in Africa, and they do something that other countries don't do, which is put serious research to serious development issues. And as I've said, please don't call it grey literature, I'll kill you. It's use-inspired basic research. Even if I'm grey, that grey literature is an insulting usage. This is serious research which is published in various formats. It's not peer-reviewed. And that is a huge hurdle to some. To others, you'll find it's research communities that act as their own peer reviewers. In other words, if you trust the community in there, you'll trust the work they're producing. And Francis Wilson, when he was recently given an honorary doctorate, said, this is research that you do with ice on your brains and fire in your heart. That's what it's about. So can we perhaps lead the rest of the world? We are doing so in my unit with Open Air, a study of open innovation in Africa, which proves that we do innovation like nobody else does, and very successfully, and it's mostly not about patents. It's about combining everything you need to combine: open research, closed research, patenting, open collaborative innovation. Take a look at the website, it's fascinating. We've been through a phase where the publishers, big publishers, have been under immense pressure, and what they're doing is they're playing with their websites, their contractual terms, embargoes, everything that could be played. This was 2015, 2016. Everything that could be played with in order to try and block the delivery of open access for girl journals was being done. I don't know if we've got through that yet. It might still be going, but I think we need a study of it. So I wondered whether the Horizon 2020 open access plans resolve these tensions through a much wider ranging model of what open access is. It's no longer about journals and data and other articles. It's an interwoven network across that part of the continent. So it's open access, open data, open science, and we've recently had a workshop with the European Commission and the Department of Science and Technology on open science and open data. We're going to need huge capacity in data scientists if we want to do that, but they say start at the bottom and work up. There are lots of infographics in the European stuff, but what you see all the time is networks and collaborations going in all directions. And the other thing is cross-national, international. Networking in a big web, cloud computing and cloud storage and cloud communications across both publishing, data, and scientific research. Everything connected. This is just a map of the way all the different pieces fit together. It's fascinating stuff, but this is the way we're going. And I think some of the problems we're looking at, although this is very challenging, may well be fixed here, because as soon as you start that collaboration, you're going to have things like the development research coming in alongside the other research and the data supporting, because that Carnegie project was hugely data-driven. So I hope that will do some of it for us. And that's a quick gallop in 3 minutes under what I was supposed to do. So I hope I've persuaded you that we need transformative thinking. That transformative thinking is possible. But in the meantime, please tell me privately whether we should turn the students onto the journal system. Because it might be much more productive than anything else we do. I'd like to sit around and watch. Thank you.